Thank you, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Before starting, I'm here only 2 days, but after 2 days I can already say you are doing a great job, so please continue. I will tell you the story, why it makes sense. So, I will today start with the quote which comes from the Danish philosopher. There are 2 ways to be fooled. One is to believe what isn't true, and the other is to refuse to believe what it is true. So, using alternative facts will unfortunately not solve our problems. Let us see some of the facts of the life in which we are living. We are currently on the planet 7.5, and we will be till mid of the century 9.7 according to estimates. This means in 1 year you will have on the planet additional population of Germany, in 4 years additional population of United States, in 100 days additional population of Taiwan. All that is happening in least developed part of the world, which has all the right to ask to live in the same way as we developed countries are living, which means that the pressure on the resources will be enormous. Few people own the same as the poorest half of the world, and the richest 1%, it's more wealthy than the rest of the world. We throw away 1/3 of the food we produce, which means 1/3 of the land, 1/3 of the water, 1/3 of the pesticides, 1/3 of everything which is connected with the production of the food. Half of the cities which will exist in 2050 have not yet been built. China has used in 3 years 11 to 13 more cement than United States of America during the whole 20th century. Climate change experts warned us that if we do not halve the emissions in next 12 years, we have no chance in staying in 1.5 degrees. If we look to biodiversity, in last 40 years, 60% of life variety disappeared from the earth. Biomass of the mammals living in the nature has been reduced in recent decades for 82%. 1 million of plastic bottles are bought every minute. Only 9% it's recycled, 12% it's incinerated, and almost 80% still ends in the environment. So if you are, that's from the latest research done in UK, if you are drinking only from bottled water, you would consume 130,000 plastic particles per year, comparing to 4,000 if you are drinking it from the tap. Finally, we are the 4th generation more likely to die as a result of lifestyle choices than of infectious diseases. So, to summarize, we are the 1st generation on this planet which lives in socio-ecological space of planetary scope. My father was still using a horse traveling to the next biggest city. So we are more interconnected and interdependent than ever. That means that our responsibility, individual and collective, for the future has enormously increased. So that's how this was described by the Club of Rome. They said that we moved from so-called empty world, which was dominated by nature, to the full world, which is now dominated by humans. In the empty world, it was the labor and infrastructure which were the limiting factor of human well-being, while in the full world, it is the natural resources and environmental things which are the limiting factors of human well-being. So remember that. Natural resources and environmental things are the limiting factors of economic development. If we look at through this kind of analysis, it's very well known in environment. D stands, it's called DPSR. D stands for drivers, P for pressures, S for state, I for impacts, and R for response. Whenever we talk about the climate change and biodiversity loss, pollution, we basically talk about state and impact, the consequences. When we start to talk about drivers and pressures, we talk about humans, human activity, economics, if you want. So why it's so important to deal with the natural resources? Because natural resources are actually the essence of the profit of the business sector, how you deal with them. But on the other hand, they are also the reason, if you don't deal with them responsibly, that we have consequences in climate change, biodiversity loss, and so on. That's important. Why? Because the policies which you apply then are different. So if it's about our economy, then let us look to some of the essentials why the things are going wrong. As you know, normally we are measuring our well-being in gross domestic product, GDP. This is actually something different. It's called Inclusive Wealth Index. It was published last year by United Nations. It is the development in the last 22 years. So the gray line on the top, which is dotted, it's so-called production capital, which increased for 100% in those years. The dotted blue line, it's human capital per capita, which, as you see, was more or less standstill in those periods. And the green line, the dotted, it's actually the natural capital, which was in those years depleted for approximately 40%. So if I summarize, growth of GDP in the past decades has been more or less reached on the basis of depletion of natural capital, full stop. So what is the reason for that? If we look to the market economy, we know that producers and consumers apparently behave on the markets rationally, even if I have to say that this is the most irrational assumption which economists are using, because the whole history of human well-being is irrationality. Anyway, we know that there are signals which are coming to the market as prices, and that we reach equilibria, the quantity where the prices and quantities actually meet. But let us look, if you remember the previous picture, what are actually the signals which we are sending on the market? Production capital, overvalued. Labor capital, undervalued. And finally, the natural capital not valued at all. So if somebody thinks that from that we can get an economic and social and environmental balance, he or she should wake up. We will never live in a world in a balance if we do not change the fundamentals. So to explain you through this is the European Environment Agency graph, which is saying economic systems should be the function of the ecosystem, and the most problematic part of that story is actually environmental externalities. So I was European Commissioner, that's the Minister for Environment, for years, and I've heard many times that I cannot introduce that and that because these are additional costs for business sector. Actually, that's wrong. These are not additional costs. These are the costs which are existing, but we deny them. We don't pay them by producer, consumer, and normally they are paid by the future generations with a simple reason, because future generations cannot complain. So to a large extent, actually, we privatize profits and socialize the costs. So now I'm going to the story which we shared today here in this environment. So first about why. Mind change reflect New Frontier and SDGs, how actually this is connected to the things which I have shared with you till now. 12 out of 17 SDGs are directly connected with natural resources. One of the conclusions which emerged from the work which was done by International Resource Panel is this one. There are trade-offs among 17 SDGs, unavoidable. But if you want to mitigate them best, you have to focus on sustainable consumption and production, which means you will not eradicate poverty, you will not achieve zero hunger, you will not address climate change, life below water, and I can continue if you don't change, in essence, the way we produce and consume. So the system which we have created. We have just recently published the report. I will just show you some of the results from that report, which focuses on resource use and the resources which were actually included in in our analysis were biomass, metals, non-metallic materials, which I know, of course, fossil fuels, and also water and land, but to a less extent, because we published different reports on that. Per capita material footprint from high-income countries, you have approximately 10 tons per capita. Average high-income countries is 27 tons per capita. Africa has 2 to 3 tons. So in high-income countries, it's 13 times higher than in low-income countries. But let us look to some of the developments in the last 50 years. Global resource use has more than tripled in the last 50 years. Global material demand per capita has almost doubled, which means that majority of that tripling is actually connected with economic growth, not with population growth. And the third one, which is quite shocking, it's actually connected to this black line, which you have on the slide. Material productivity, which was increasing till here, and then started to decrease. Material productivity is efficiency of the use of the resources per the unit of GDP. How that is possible if it's increasing in all the countries? Because majority of the products which you are buying today, which we are buying also in Europe, were before produced in high resource efficient countries like Japan, Europe, US, and now they are produced in less efficient countries, Bangladesh, Indonesia, China. And that means that overall, globally, resource efficiency per the unit of GDP is actually falling. If we look to the results of environmental impacts in the value chain of only extraction and processing phase, so it's not the use phase, 90% of global biodiversity loss and water stress are connected to those areas which are more or less biomass use. So if you want to address biodiversity loss and water stress, agriculture is the name of the game. Second, it's actually 50% of the global change impacts was connected with that, and even 1/3 of the air pollution health impacts, which means if you are buying your car and you are parking your car for the whole life, you have only created 1/3 of the pollution. Extraction of the materials and production of the car. Finally, if we look, we have done also the modeling where we have compared historical trends with the estimates of towards sustainability scenario assumptions, and there are, which were included in the study, resource efficiency, climate change mitigation and removal, landscape and life on land protection, and shifts in societal behavior. If you take all that into account, what actually you found out as a result of the modeling is that you see in the first, the resource use has almost halved the growth of resource use, because we will have the growth of resource use. Assumptions for CO2 gas emissions were aligned with the IPCC. Biodiversity, it's a reverted picture to historical trends, but what is interesting, economic growth, it's actually better if you go that way than if you go the historical way. So one of the conclusions, which is pretty easy, is that achieving decoupling is possible and can deliver substantial social and environmental benefits, including the repair of past environmental damage, while also supporting economic development and human well-being. So this is leading me to the core of the concept which we are defending. It's called decoupling. So we believe that one can still develop, increase human well-being and economic growth, but it has to be decoupled from the resource use, and both has to be decoupled from environmental impacts. That is leading me for the first time to mention actually the circular economy. Circular economy is an instrument to deliver decoupling. It's actually part of the bigger picture of economic, societal, and cultural transformation to the SDGs related economy, which leads me to the second part. That's what strategic change, redefine, and the circular economy. I will not talk about the business model because this is for the people from the business sector to talk about. This is the outline of a circular economy sector system. That's the butterfly from Ellen MacArthur. Left, it's renewable resources, green, blue are non-renewable resources, and as you can see, recycle, it's actually one of the upper parts. So if I can say so, it's the worth of the good, which doesn't mean that it's not good. It's very much needed and essential. But it's very much important that we focus also on how to reduce the use of the resources. There are many ways how to use that in the economy: regenerate, share, optimize, loop, virtualize. So everything that it's part of the circular economy concept. There is exchange, so there is no recipe which you can use for any country. So you have to accommodate it to your story. This is connected with the climate change because I consider very well understanding that it's very important to understand what is the role of the circular economy in the climate change battle. Today, this is Paris Agreement. We talk only about energy, more or less, and how we deal with the CO2 emissions. But if you for a second imagine an economy in which you would have abundant energy, cheap energy, and all renewable energy, and the current models of consumption and production in mobility, in food production, in housing, do you think that we have solved the climate change problem? No way. So you have to combine it actually with land, water, materials decoupling story. That's actually leading to the real results. So just give you two examples from something which was done by material economics. This is already integrating all the policies from the energy sector. If you move from linear to circular, you can save in steel, plastic, aluminum, cement 56% of CO2 emissions. Or if you want the story of the mobility system, European car, it's parked 92%, 1.6% is looking for parking, 1% is sitting in congestion, 5% we are driving it. This 5%, it's 1.5 person in the car, which is 5-seater, which means that the utility of that car is actually 2%. So if you shift from so-called ownership system to the sharing system, you can actually save 70% of CO2 emissions. You can save 77% cost of each family, and you can save approximately 74% of the externalities and cost to the society. So it makes sense. Don't build new roads. Take the decision that private car will not be allowed in your city in 15 years. All innovation will happen. We need to move from quantity-driven profits to consumers' needs. As already mentioned by Deputy Minister, we do not need light bulbs, we need light. We do not need chairs, we need to sit. We do not need cars, we need mobility. We do not need refrigerators, we need chilled and healthy food. We do not need CDs, we want to listen to the music. We do not need pesticides. We basically need healthy plants. So we need to think on dematerialization, rethinking ownership from efficiency to sufficiency. What is the difference if you sell light bulb? You have a profit of selling as many light bulbs. They are your profit. If you sell light, more light bulbs used by the producer are actually his cost. So you save resources. And that's the essence of the logic, which is really important. So we move from real extended producer responsibility, which today looks so better connecting producer with the product. Today, producer is responsible for product till end of production, then it's consumer, then it's actually society. So what would be essential is to connect producer again to the product, so design business models, retaining value, rethinking ownership, aligning incentives and regulation. It's actually the name of the game. So today we have a legislation which is more or less focused on waste, framework directive focused on waste, and on the top of that waste hierarchy, legally requirement is that you reduce the waste. So we would need really to move from waste logic to the product logic. So thinking of from waste hierarchy to product hierarchy, from product waste retention, end of product status, producer ownership concept, design for sustainability requirements, public procurement requirements. So this will be the real future of the focus of the circular economy. Product passport, registration for market access, and I could continue. So we have done also analysis which was connected with the manufacturing sector. Manufacturing, it's accounting 12% of global emissions, 19% of EU carbon footprint. It's actually 40 to 60% of the total cost of the base of manufacturing are connected to materials and components, and sustainable resource management could save 12 to 23% of material costs. So we focused on so-called value retention processes, remanufacturing and comprehensive refurbishment as the full service of VRP, and repair and direct reuse as partial service. And if we look only to the results of the full service life value retention processes, the benefits are like this: saving new material input 80 to 99%, reducing embedded energy and material use from 79 to 99%, reduction in process energy needs and emissions from 57 to 87%, then reduction in production waste from 80 to 95%, job creation, increased requirement for skilled labor, and reduction in production cost up to 2044. This was the first analysis done on actual data coming from those sectors. And it's really convincing material. So when we talk about regulation, I think it's important to understand that business sector is actually not afraid of regulation. What they are afraid is of more regulation, of unfairness, of free riding, uncertainty. So they need level playing field and predictability. Let me now conclude. So important messages which you should remember are these: the existing global resource use trends and their environmental and health impacts are extremely worrying and can and should not continue. Second, circular economy based on the concept of decoupling is an essential ingredient of an economy which would be SDG compliant. Third, if appropriate policies, including resource efficiency, are applied, we can do the change. And last, circular economy solutions are an important part of the answer to climate change challenges and biodiversity loss. So, the World Economic Forum concluded that the challenge seems not to be any more inadequate scientific evidence, rather it's one of cooperation and implementation. And complexity and scale of these challenges requires new forms of collaboration and more systemic approaches. So we need more of, if I can say so, circularity even in the global governance. So more of the sharing of sovereignty than today some nations are calling for owing sovereignty. That will not solve the problem. Maybe the best example is actually European Union, because many decades ago we have decided to avoid conflicts and wars. We have quite some problems, but it has delivered. So it actually has delivered what we wanted. And I think it's really important to understand that. In short, transition to a more sustainable economy and society, it's unavoidable. Whenever somebody would mention but, stop him there, because it's unavoidable. We can talk about how, but we cannot talk about but. Humans are supposed to be intelligent, so it's high time to prove it. We have to fix a broken compass. When Albert Einstein was asked why the mankind was so intelligent that we invented the nuclear energy, but we were so stupid that we actually use it also for destroying ourselves, his answer was that simple, my friend: it's because politics is more difficult than physics. And in essence, the story which I was sharing with you is a story of physics. we are denying physical laws, and this never ends well. And solutions are in the hands of politics. That's why let's take the responsibility which we have of politics, of everybody, including the business sector. Why the changes are so difficult in practice? I basically see three major reasons. The first is that political cycles, public institutions, financial institutions, even to a large extent, private institutions, have very much short-term logic inbuilt in the decision-making. While the system changes which we are facing are a bit longer term today. Second, production and consumption systems are based in the logic of consumerism fueled by growth based on quantities and measured by GDP. Until we will have that kind of a system, we don't have a lot of chance for success. So we have to revert the logic. We have to understand that it's actually more does not mean on the long term better. And the way how I try to explain the GDP, it's actually, you will not reach the goal by walking faster if you are walking in the wrong direction. And that's pretty much where the GDP stands for and for what stands for. And finally, transition to a more sustainable economy and society will only be possible if it's fair, just, and inclusive. That means many of the people have invested in the past in good faith. And for the transition which is needed, we have to help them. Public help is needed. But at the same time, we have to understand that we have to lower the differences in our societies. Greta Thunberg, it's not a symbol of awakened young generation in the first place. She's a symbol of a failure of our generation. And it's a shame that we need 16 years old kid to tell us what we have to do, since we all know what to do. North Star guiding our policies and behavior should absolutely be sustainable development goals. And we need a kind of intergenerational agreement, a program for the future generations which would push sustainability first. So, you know, circular economy is not a new concept. It's actually the oldest concept on the earth. Nothing in nature is lost. Nothing, everything has its purpose. Everything is organized on the principles of circular economy. So the real question which we have to ask ourselves is this one: do we agree that humans are part of nature too? And if we would have the problem of answering that question, I would ask for the advice of the most famous Belgian detective, since Belgium is now my second country in which I'm living, otherwise I'm Slovene. When he was once asked why he is speaking about himself always in a third person, he replied something like that: if one is such a genius like myself, it is very important to establish a healthy distance towards himself. So, if humanity, if we believe that us humans are so intelligent that we can rule the world, let's establish a healthy distance and let's take the responsibility which we are bearing. And if you are not convinced by that, that's the final slide, then I hope this will convince you. It's actually the quote from distinguished professor Guy McPherson from Arizona University in the United States. He said something like that: if you think the economy is more important than environment and health, try holding your breath while counting your money. So, dear friends, you are doing a great job. And as I said at the beginning, please do continue, because that's actually very important. It's not important only for your future, it's important for our common future. And I would like to thank you for your attention.
Thank you too. Many thanks to Professor Janez Potočnik. Thank you very much.